All right. Okay. Morning, everyone. Actually, I don't know if 10:45 counts as morning anymore. Hi, everyone. Hey, so I'm Bryson Tyrrell. I'm a systems development engineer at Jamf Software. I'm joined at Jamf. I'm joined by Dan Eng from the University of Minnesota, and we're going to talk to you a little bit today about external patch sources with Jamf Pro, a feature that was introduced a while back. Surprisingly crowded room. I'm trying to gauge whether it's the level of interest in patch sources or the level of general unsureness and confusion around patch sources. There we go. All right, cool. There's a bit of that for everybody in here. All right, so what we're going to talk through today is actually a big chunk of this is going to be about patch definitions themselves, because none of this stuff works all that well if you don't understand how patch definitions translate into the reports and the policies that you get out of the product. So we're going to be spending some time on that. Then we're going to talk about some open source utilities that I've been working on to try and make the process of creating and managing those definitions a little easier. So we'll get into talking about patch CLI in a little bit. Then after we cover all that stuff about patch definitions, we will get into external patch sources themselves, what the requirements are, how that gets set up. Then after we talk about setting up your own, we'll then talk about an alternative option, which is the community patch project. And then once we're done with all that, I'm going to hand it over to Dan. And Dan's going to talk about how the University of Minnesota has been leveraging some automation with AutoPkg, their own patch server, and some funky scripting he's been doing.
Yeah.
All right, so patch definitions, which actually does make up the meat of this presentation. Bait and switch on you. So, patch definitions, also known as software titles. I have some, this is a sponsored session. I'm still going to say I have some contention with how we've named things. I think it's a little confusing. So, definitions are also referred to as software titles when you're going and reading the KBs. It's kind of easier just to refer to them as patch definitions, because when you keep saying the words patch and software over and over again for different things, it gets confusing. So bear with me that some of my language may diverge from the official documentation here and there, but you should see it in parentheses. Don't shake your head at me, Kelly. Out. All right, so anyway, patch definitions. These are JSON files that Jamf Pro ingests from a feed, or otherwise known as a patch source, over HTTP. They look pretty much like this. So on the left-hand side here, we have the software title, which is also the patch definition, the JSON file for it. These are the top-level keys. Defines things like the name, the publisher. In this case, you're looking at the one that we have from the official Jamf source for macOS, so there is no application name or bundle ID. But you can also see the last modified date, which refers to the definition file and not the version, just the last time this definition was modified. The current version, so whatever the latest patch for this was, that version string gets reported at the top level here. And then requirements, patches, external extension attributes, we'll get into those in a little bit. And then lastly, the ID, which is how Jamf Pro knows to go look for this when it needs to go update it. So we'll explore some of these extra keys in a little bit, but on the right-hand side, we have the patches, or as I'm going to be referring to them from now on, the versions. So we're getting into that territory where the word patch gets used repeatedly in a lot of the documentation. This is called a patch object in the documentation. I just refer to it as the version object because it's a little more clear to me. So this is what defines what a version of a particular piece of software is. The patch definition itself, describes a piece of software, and then it has an ordered version history under the patches key. And it's ordered from latest at the top to oldest at the bottom or at the end. And that's how it determines which version is newer or older than another version. And that was a design decision that was made because, and I won't name names, there are vendors out there who do strange things with version strings in ways that you can't actually sort them. Robert Hammond knows what I'm talking about there. There are plenty of vendors out there who don't conform to the way Apple tells you to do things, and you cannot determine through code reliably whether or not one version is older than another one. So the decision was made that in our definitions, we would have it be an ordered array, an ordered list. So that way it was very deterministic about where in the history a particular definition or a particular version fell. So some of the details that we got in here, the actual release date. So the release date timestamp refers to when this particular version of the software came out. The minimum operating system that's required for it, whether or not this patch is going to require a reboot when you install it. And then there's some other things here for kill apps, components, capabilities. We'll get into those in a little bit. So the official Jamf source, the one that just comes along for the ride when you have Jamf Pro set up, that contains over 60 definitions that we maintain for you. And now a lot of these definitions, actually, as you can see, are variants off of each other because there was a change made that conflicted with the prior version history that was established. Maybe there was an update to the bundle ID that didn't quite work with it. So you'll see that there are different tracks for pieces of software that are very similar, Java especially. The KB link that I have at the bottom here actually describes all of the patches or all the software titles that we maintain and make available on this feed, as well as any notes or any caveats about them and what they actually track. So if you need to go get the details about a specific title that we provide, you go to this KB and you can read up all about it. So if you're using patch sources and you're using patch management and you add one of these titles into Jamf Pro, you unlock some new functionality for yourself. First, in the case of notifications, both in the form of when you log into Jamf Pro, there's that new notification option that's been there for a little while now. If you are subscribed to any of these titles from a patch source and then Jamf Pro pulls in a new version because it detects one, it will notify you in the UI. The other thing it unlocks is there's a webhook, the patch software title updated webhook. That will fire off every time from Jamf Pro whenever it gets an update to one of those definitions. So you can extend this out further when you want to have notifications off of Jamf Pro when it's actually receiving an updated definition. The next thing is reports. There are some special reports that you get along for the ride with the patch management features. And that includes some stuff that you can actually add right into the login dashboard of Jamf Pro so you can see the status of your fleet at a glance. And then the big one is the patch policies themselves. The ability to actually have the patch management features of Jamf Pro manage your fleet to make sure that they're at the latest version that you want them to be at. So let's talk a little bit about how the stuff in the JSON file maps to what you see in the UI, because it makes a lot more sense when you're connecting those than just looking at a document that describes what the JSON syntax is. So here I'm in the patch management section of computer management, and I'm looking at the titles that are available from the Jamf source, and I'm going to go and add that macOS one that we were looking at in the example earlier. So we're going to add this. That's as big as that can get. I was actually hoping that'd be a lot more clear.
That's all right.
Okay, we might have some difficulties with that later on, but we'll see what we can do. This is being recorded, and the slides will be available, so no worries there. All right, so when you add a title, you're going to get this default report page. This gets generated right away. This is all based upon the computer inventory data in Jamf Pro. So we can see that I get this nice little pie chart. This is the piece that's embeddable inside the login dashboard. So for every single one of your patch titles, you can check the box, and you can get that nice, login dashboard view of the state of your fleet. Below that is a list of all the versions that are inside that definition and showing how many computers are at each one of those versions. And then on the right-hand side, you see that table view, which then lists all the computers that are included, and then as much detail as you want about those. In the lower right-hand corner, you can see there's that export button. You can take this report and dump it out to a CSV file, and then do whatever you want with it from there. So lots of options when it comes to the reporting side of these. So in order for a computer to be considered up to date, it has to meet the requirements that are described in the components key. So if you're looking at the JSON here, under that top level patches key, we're looking inside the version object itself. Inside the version object, there's a components key, and that components key is going to contain what the criteria is for it. So the version, it has to report version 10.14.5. The platform has to be Mac. For Mac OS, that kind of makes sense. If anyone still ever used the Windows Recon features of Jamf Pro? So a carryover from that era, but the key thing here is that operating system version is 10.14.5. And if a computer meets this, then it's reporting as, yes, I'm actually at the version that is considered the latest according to the definition. So that's how you get into the green for your pie chart. Now you'll notice that these criteria that are inside the components key, they look a lot like what you see for smart groups, and they are. So what patch management is doing in the background automatically for you is it's creating and auto-managing smart groups based upon everything that's inside that definition file. So it's actually doing a kind of like a lot of what JSS importer does in a way, but it's doing it based upon a fixed file format. So whatever's inside that version history, that gets applied to these background smart groups, and that's what's driving the reports and driving the scope for the patch policies themselves. So let's shift gears now to what it looks like when we're actually creating a patch policy. So we're over on that tab, and I'm going to create a patch policy to make sure that computers will be upgraded to whatever I define as the target version. So in this case, I want the target version to be whatever the latest supported version I have is in the definition, which is going to be 10.14.5. This list, you can only select from versions where you've actually associated a package for it. I don't show that in these slides, but there are notes on this page for you to follow, but the process is you need to upload the package for that piece of software first, so it's inside Jamf Pro's package list, and then you need to associate it with the version that it belongs to before you get to this point. There's KBs and there's some webinars and stuff that cover all of that, so I'm not going to go into too much detail about creating and configuring patch policies, but just want to make note of that. So once you select the target version, you're going to note that it pops out some key details here. So we can see what the release date was. We can see that it's going to require the incremental update no. That's actually for something else I'll get into. You can ignore that key. You can ignore that line item completely. But we can also see that there is a reboot required for this and what the minimum OS version is. These details are being pulled again from that version object that we were looking at before. So when we're back in the JSON here, you can see, of course, the version string itself. The minimum operating system is defined here. Rebooting, true, false, whether or not the package is going to require that. That's all information that gets used by the Jamf binary when it's actually executing a patch policy. So the piece that I had said to ignore earlier comes back to two keys, standalone and dependencies. They're in there, and they aren't used. They are placeholders for what is going to be intended functionality, where you could actually have different patch definitions with dependencies on other patch definitions. So standalone true means that this definition doesn't rely on any others. So if you ever had a situation where you had different pieces of software where they had to be installed in a certain order of events, there's placeholders here that were intended to go down that path later, but none of that's implemented. So you have to include the standalone is true in all your definitions. It just has to be there. And the dependencies array, which would have defined the other patch definitions that this one's reliant upon or they're reliant on it, that they would have gone in dependencies. That's also not used. But just note that you still have to include the dependencies key with an empty array in there. Oh, no, go back. All right. Then one other thing to note here, the kill apps key. Kill apps, so of course macOS doesn't have to kill itself to install itself, but for software type, for just normal pieces of software applications, normally you have to make sure that application is not running before it actually goes to update itself with your package. So in here is where you would include an array of objects that would be the bundle ID and the application name, and that gets used by the Jamf binary for when it goes to run the patch policy, it will force close those applications before actually installing your package. That is configurable behavior in the patch policy. Like I said, I'm not going to go too deep into how you configure patch policies, just how the definitions map into it. But that's that's how you define that behavior in here. What needs to be closed before you can actually install the package associated to this version.
Bryson, do you have the flexibility that you don't have to force quit? Do you actually need an interface where the user can lock shut down or safely shut down the app? No.
Yeah, let's come back to that off.
That's fine.
Yeah, that I don't believe that exists in the product currently. But you have the option of doing self-service or auto push, and in self-service they get a warning, I believe.
Yeah, you get a warning, and you can also dictate how long before it actually kills the app.
Yeah.
A lot of ours are set to 30 minutes just to give them time to finish what they're doing and close it.
Cool.
Thanks.
Dan will be the better source for those questions when we get to the end. All right. So the last piece of this, patch policies don't target your entire fleet. That's one big thing that people kind of get confused about when it comes to this. They only target eligible computers by default, and then that gets narrowed down from there. And this eligible computers list is actually a combination of different criteria that's defined inside the policy. So there are two areas where this is defined. At the top level, that criteria key, or that requirements key that was at the top level of the patch definition, that states computers that meet these criteria are eligible. And at a base level, that usually means they have the software installed. For anything that's an application, that's a definition pointing to that defines an application, it's going to usually be the bundle identifier. Does it have this bundle ID present in the inventory? If so, it's an eligible computer because it has it installed, so we can apply the patches to that software to it. In this case, the Mac OS one, it's really just saying, is it a Mac? Which, again, this is a throwback to the days when you could have a mixed inventory if you really did that. Now, that eligibility gets further refined at the actual version level. So when we're picking a target version, that target version has its own requirements. So in this case, 10.14.5 minimum OS is the minimum OS of the target has to be 10.9. So in that case, even though all computers have Mac OS, and those are all the eligible computers, for the 10.14.5 patch itself, that eligible computer list gets further narrowed down to the individual capabilities or requirements of the version itself. So that just determines the full number of computers that could potentially run this. From this point forward, when you're back in the UI and you're defining target computers, target users, target groups, anything like that that's scope related, that's applied on top of the eligible computers list. Whatever's eligible for your given target version, you can narrow that. You can't add anything that's outside of it. Which this is also a distinction that some people, when we introduced this feature, got hung up on because you only use patch policies to update your fleet. You use normal policies to do first-time installations. All right. So Jamf provides currently a feed of over 60 definitions that we maintain, and they cover what was determined to be the most popular pieces of software amongst our customer base. There was this gap, though, when we released the feature where admins all immediately said, well, we want to be able to do our own, because they have a number of really good reasons. You all have a number of really good reasons to wanting to roll your own definitions and not just rely on the Jamf feed. The biggest one is just that we cover a very small section of the available software on the Mac platform, and we can't actually maintain definitions for everything with our current processes. So you have a situation where you are going to want to be able to use patch reporting and patch policies for software that's not in our feed. So we need to give you the ability to actually do that. Kelly had some choice words about this, but our definitions may not always be adequate for your needs. And when I say adequate, I just mean that you are using a patch definition where we have made decisions about how we determine what constitutes the version. Like what in the inventory states that this computer is actually compliant with that version. And it's pretty basic on our end. We're really just doing version matching. Does it match this version? You might have additional requirements beyond that for some of the titles that we release. There's also a timing thing. So our definitions generally get updated within 24 hours of a release. There are lots of admins that want to go faster than that. There's a KB article that you'll see a link to later that I believe states when we... Oh, no, the KB article from earlier. That does state what our guidelines are for what the window is after a patch is released to when the feed will be updated. A lot of admins want to do it within hours, not within a day or so. So that's another good reason why you might end up rolling your own for software titles that we expose already, because you want to actually push it out to your fleet faster. And then the other big one is that there's plenty of internal tools that you track, and you want to be able to build reports off of them. The patch reporting features are really great for that. You don't necessarily even have to use the patch policies portion, but if you can build definitions for all your internal tools, you can then dashboard them in Jamf Pro based off the inventory data. And then this was also a surprising one that sort of has emerged over time since we released external patch sources, and that's where people are going off and they're creating definitions that don't target applications. They're doing things like plugins or bundles that are scattered throughout the system, and they're tracking things that aren't applications, and it's kind of interesting. And you can get away with it through the use of extension attributes, which we'll talk about that a little bit more later. So this now comes to Patch CLI, the tooling to help make this process a little bit easier. Because the thing is that with Patch CLI and the patchstarter.py script that has preceded it, patch definitions end up being a lot of JSON. There's if you went and actually went out to the Jamf feed in your browser and went to the URL to get that macOS one, it's several hundred lines long because it goes way back for the version history. It ends up being a lot of JSON that has to get created if you're fleshing out the history of a particular piece of software. And there's also a lot of details in there. You saw a lot of key values that had to be populated, and they need to conform to how we've documented it. There's a lot of room in there for mistakes. And really, manually editing JSON in general is not a good time. You're always going to end up copying and pasting things between different JSON files. You'll have to fix the curly braces, make sure you've fixed the commas, make sure that you've actually changed the values after you've done that. Even if you're using an editor that does auto-completion and auto-tabbing and all that to make it more readable, it's still kind of a messy thing to do. And lastly, the goal behind getting a tool out for generating definitions was to lower the barrier to entry. Advanced features are easier to get into if you have some tooling along for the ride to help you get into it. So, patchstarter.py, the originator of this whole thing. It was my first go at a basic script to generate patch definitions. And for its purpose, it actually has served pretty well so far. It generates patch definitions from existing application bundles. So you have the script on your computer, you have the application on your computer, you point it at the path to that application, and it spits out the definition for you. Then it also will generate just the version objects themselves. So instead of having to generate the whole definition, you can still point it at your the new version of that application, but instead of regenerating the whole definition and then having to merge two of them together, you can just generate the version JSON and more easily add it back in. And then over time, as people ask for it, the ability to override certain values and customize it was added to address some other shortcomings that came up. So it does offer some flexibility in how you generate those initial definitions for a piece of software. And then it also does the bundling of the extension attributes appropriately into it with a catch, which I'll get into. So yeah, this is the slide where it would have been really nice if that was a lot more crisp. But this is pretty much the help text that patchstarter.py spits out. If you go on GitHub and get a copy of the script, you can just print this out for yourself in the terminal. It's much more readable. But it has a lot of options. The help text details the how it's determining the values that it's populating into it. The name is derived from the CF bundle name attribute inside info plist. The ID is going to be the name stripped of any spaces. The version, my bad on this, the version is derived from CF bundle short string, which much later I found out that we actually use CF bundle string for this. So there is an option in the script to override the version to whatever you want it to be. But that was something I intended to go back and fix for the patch CLI project so that it conforms to the way that the official Jamf feed is done, which is it's all based off of CF bundle string. The minimum OS version is pulled from LS minimum system version, also info plist. The release date is determined by the last modified timestamp of the application bundle itself. And then because there's no reliable way to determine the publisher from the details that are included with the application, and that includes signing, by the way, it's also not reliable just to go look at who signed the thing to try and rip the publisher name out of it. That's just left blank by default. It doesn't actually have to have a value when you publish it anyway, but there's an override argument for the script so that you can pass in the name of the publisher when you're creating a definition. So using the script, that whole ease of use thing, like just be able to jump in and start doing things, it does accomplish that fairly well. You pull the script up, you call it, you point it at an application, and there you go. You have an initial definition file that you can start working from that will work that'll work with the Jamf Pro for that particular version. But there's a lot of limitations. Like, it doesn't actually fulfill all the needs that have come out of this. Lots of people actually wanted a way of spitting out a template or having it generate something based upon more input, because they did want to do things like more specialized patch definitions that pointed at plugins and things like that, and not necessarily application bundles. And you have to determine some of those details differently. And also a lot more control over what the values are when it does generate one for an application anyway. Like it auto completes a lot of things for you. Very few things are customizable. So that's one limitation. It also doesn't maintain pre-existing files. That was not functionality I wrote for it originally. It's used for generating an initial definition, and then the idea was you would then generate the version objects, the version pieces of JSON later on, and then go back and add them in. But that can be a lot better by having something that would actually just, if you need to add a version to it, you just give it the file that it should go modify. It'll parse that in, add the version, and then dump it back out again. This doesn't do that. It's something that would make this process a lot easier. And then finally, on the subject of extension attributes, embedded extension attributes are a feature of this spec, this format. There are several Jamf official definitions that include extension attributes, notably the Java ones, the Firefox ones. They include extension attributes because they need to track the versions for those differently than what's done in just standard inventory collection. So it's a feature of it for you to be able to actually embed an extension attribute into your definition and then reference that, and then for your criteria to be able to customize what counts as an eligible computer, what counts as as a computer that's compliant with whatever this target version is. While I wrote this to take care of encoding the scripts and embedding them, I didn't write it to actually build out the criteria to use them. If you did that, you still have to go back and manually edit it. So that was mostly because it was not something where I really had a clear idea of how to set that behavior in a way that was really flexible. Which then leads into this project, which aims to address all the shortcomings of the patchstarter.py project. It's going to be just like any other command line tool. You're not going to have to call it with Python first and the path to the file or anything like that. This CLI tool aims to improve on a few things. One is that it'll be installable through pip. You won't have to go clone a GitHub repo and then go grab that version every single time when you want to actually get the latest version of that. You'll just use pip, which, show of hands, who's familiar with pip right now? So everyone who's not familiar with pip, that's the Python utility for installing packages. You will become very familiar with it as we axe Python 2 and you have to go to Python 3. Because you will need to be able to, if you're using Python in your environments, you'll have to install Python 3 on your systems, and you'll need to be installing packages into it going forward with Catalina. So if you don't know it now, you're going to get really intimate with it soon. Like I said before, patchstarter.py did nothing for maintaining files that you've already created. I kind of left you to your own devices to do that after the fact. Patch CLI will address that, where you can just continuously maintain definition files locally after the fact. So that's coming. Another big thing, if you do open up your definition files and you are manually editing them, it would be nice if you were able to find out if they were good before you threw them onto your server. Patch CLI will have the schema files for patch definitions in it, so you will be able to just tell it to validate your files to ensure that yes, they are actually good and compliant. It doesn't validate that you entered the correct values, but it'll tell you if the schema is valid, which will prevent some headaches down the road if Jamf Pro is trying to ingest a JSON file that doesn't match what it expects, because it'll just error out in the background. And then the extension attribute piece, the missing link there, it will allow you to define what the behavior of an included extension attribute is, meaning the values it returns and what they mean. So then it will build the criteria for the patch definition itself and the versions appropriately. So going back to that whole managing existing definitions, part of the reason why I never built logic for extension attributes is because I didn't have any logic built into the original script to be able to look at the parent definition and state, well, this version should reference this extension attribute in that parent definition. So those two things that will actually allow me to go back and make it so that you can better integrate extension attributes into your definition files. And then last part of this is that it's going to have some API integration. We'll get back to that. So we're about, 15, 16 minutes in, something like, oh no, we're 32 minutes in. Wow, I'm actually pacing myself a lot better than I thought I would. Okay, we are now half an hour in, finally going to talk about external patch sources themselves. The patch definition file really is the most important piece to this, because the thing doesn't work if you don't have good, valid definition files. So, here we go. Batteries are not included with this feature, pretty much at all. Unlike a lot of other things in Jamf Pro, this is a very advanced feature of the product. It doesn't come with any hand-holding necessarily. It has a lot more of an engineering focus than an administration focus. There's no real UI elements to this besides pointing Jamf Pro at where your server is. The rest of it is all up to you. You are going to be responsible for setting up and maintaining wherever the feed lives for this thing. But one key thing to talk about here is the fact that the feature for external patch sources, it's completely identical to the official Jamf feed. The way that Jamf Pro interacts with our official feed, the feature for external patch sources was really just us opening that up so that you're able to point it at additional URLs, and it expects the same exact style of feed that it gets from the official Jamf source. So that's why it was kind of quick for us to unlock that feature, so to speak, because we're just exposing the exact same framework for external sources that we already use internally. So there are 3 endpoints that you need to expose on a server in order for it to be a valid external patch source. We're going to go through these one by one, and there's going to be if you're getting a picture of the URL that's at the bottom, that URL will stay at the bottom for all these slides, so you have a chance to go Google it. So, this link also, in addition to describing these URLs for an external patch source, it actually defines, it's what defines the whole patch definition spec itself. It documents all those keys and objects that make up a full definition. So, like, we didn't fully explore the whole thing. We explored the key points and how they relate back to Jamf Pro and how it does things, but this KB will actually go into detail on every single object and key that makes up the full definition file. So, bookmark this if you're getting into this stuff. All right, get/software. This is the first main endpoint. This is an endpoint that should return an array of JSON summaries. Not the patch definitions themselves, just summaries of them. So, Jamf Pro uses this endpoint in order to display that list when you go to add definitions to it. So, like when you go to patch management and then you click on Jamf, and then you have that whole list of all the titles that we maintain. It's actually doing a call to this endpoint on our official feed, and then it's displaying all the results. And it's only key details here, so we can see what the current version of it's supposed to be. We can see what the last modified timestamp was. We can see the name and the publisher, as well as the ID. And the ID is how Jamf Pro actually interacts with this service for retrieving those definitions. So, /software also needs to have the ability to pass it after another slash a comma-separated list of patch IDs. And this returns a subset of the full list. So instead of returning a summary of every single definition that you have on your server, you are only returning the ones that Jamf actually cares about. This is what's used when Jamf is checking in for updates to your definitions. It does this every 5 minutes. It goes out, it calls this, it passes it a string of comma-separated IDs for all the definitions that you want, and then it actually goes through and it checks that last modified timestamp value to see if it differs from the one that it has. If it's different, it will then proceed on to pulling in the definition to get any of those changes that might have happened. If you ever want to force Jamf Pro to pull in a definition, just go change that value, and then it'll trigger it to do it. Even if nothing underlying has actually changed, if you just want to force it to do it, because maybe you're troubleshooting something, you would change the last modified value. That's what it uses to determine if it needs to go pull a definition, which it does through this endpoint, get/patch/patch ID. This is the endpoint that should return the full JSON for a patch definition for a given ID. And that's really it. That makes up an external patch source. It's those 3 endpoints. But there's some assembly required there because, as you noticed, you have 2 endpoints where not only do you have to return an array that's just a summary of your definitions, but you also have to have the ability to return only a subset of them. So you have the option of just manually maintaining files that get returned for those endpoints, but you're probably going to have a bad time with that if you're constantly changing your definitions, because then you have to go back and modify those files, and you have to modify the other file to actually, return the correct number of IDs for what it's doing. Like, that gets messy, trying to do it the purely file approach. You're going to be better off building some sort of web application out of a framework that can then parse through all your definitions to return those summaries. Which, you do have a lot of options out there for doing that. I did a workshop here once on Jamf Pro integrations using Flask. I love Flask. Django is a lot heavier, but those are the 2 most popular Python frameworks to build your own. Ruby on Rails for anybody who's into that. I know Chris Lascelles over at Pixar really loves his Ruby. Express.js for those of you who have gone down the dark path of Node. Spring for those who still, yeah, cool. Spring. And oh my God, there's a Swift framework now. There's a Swift framework. You can do it in Swift. It's called Vapor. Hint, hint, there might be a session about that on Friday that someone's doing. It might be at 9 o'clock. You might want to check it out if you're actually at least interested in seeing what it's like to build a web API in Swift. But if this is how you're feeling when it comes to the idea of actually setting this up and you don't want to do any of that, well, this next section is for you. This is where I start talking about the community patch project. And caveats here. The projects I've discussed right here are not official Jamf projects. These are projects that I do on the side. So you can call Jamf support and they will help you, but it's, nope, they will. Kelly, don't give me that look. This has been established. It is known. You can call Jamf support and they will help you with getting the stuff set up. But just understand that community patch itself is not a Jamf product. So if you're having a problem with the service, you have to come to me and not Jamf support. If you have a problem with Jamf Pro and reading from it, call them first, and then if they point the finger at me, then come after me. So, community patch. Community patch is a fully public external patch source that requires no server setup on your end at all because it's in the cloud. It's just available. It just works. It allows the Mac admin community to create and share patch definitions, which, much like with AutoPkg Recipes and the sort, we love having a whole bunch of stuff that's already out there, already done, that we can take advantage of without having to roll it on our own. It has a simple-to-use API to enable automation workflows, which is the really key thing. You don't want to always have to do a whole bunch of work before you put your patch on the server. It has APIs to allow you to manage those definitions after the fact. So, as Dan will go into with a different project, those APIs enable some automated workflows. And then everyone who is a contributor on the service is actually a unique patch source. You don't subscribe to community patch and then get several hundred definitions that you have to go hunt and peck through. You can go look on community patch to see who has the definitions that you want to use, and then you can add them as a patch source and take and pick and choose from the ones that they have that you want to use. So I'm actually going to walk through what the current day experience is with community patch. So we're on the main page here. It's really bare bones because I'm not a UI developer. I'll learn this stuff eventually, but this is what you get for now. So at the top there, we have this nice little button to click to hit register. It pops up a prompt. I give it what my display name will be. I give it my email address. And then after I hit submit, a few moments later, I'll get this really ugly bare bones email because I'm not an HTML guy, that has a link for me to go verify who I am, that I actually, entered in an email address that was valid and, I'm a real person. Do that, redirects me here, says, hey, congrats, you're verified. You're going to get an API token, which shows up like this. Copy this token, keep it somewhere safe. This is what you will use for managing the definitions under your contributed ID from this point forward. So, you have an API token. You need to use that API token. You can go read the documentation to figure out what all you're allowed to do with it. These docs are hosted on readthedocs.org. It's a service for open source projects that allows them that actually will build documentation every time pushes happen to GitHub. I do this for a lot of my open source projects. So every time I commit code changes, these docs get updated. So you can come here. The main page kind of walks through what it's like to set up and become a contributor. If you go down to the patch API, you can then start seeing what it takes to actually interact with the service. Each section will contain the endpoint, an overview of what it requires to interact with, what the responses are going to be, and it contains examples. So for example, going down here to the one for updating the version of a definition, you can see that we've got some curl examples here. And all the examples are in curl, so that way you can just copy and paste over into the terminal with some modifications, and you can start playing around with it right away. You'll note that all the documentation still references patchstarter.py. That's going to stay that way until patch CLI hits a stable 1.0 status and the features of it are actually fully integrated. Because, as I hinted before, patch CLI will come with API integrations in it. You will not need to output to curl at all like you see with the patchstarter.py examples. You'll be able to just have patch CLI do all the work against the community patch API for you. So once we get to that point, the docs will be updated, and these will become much more generic curl examples, and then there will be a patch CLI reference alongside them that's pretty much showing you the easy button. So there, that one looks good. So here's we're going to make our first definition with my new contributor that I just created on the service. So I'm going to make a post to beta2.communitypatch.com/API/v1/titles. I'm going to actually use that, use what you saw inside the example where I'm calling patch CLI using some bash output redirection so it feeds into the data argument for curl. I'm going to pass a couple of headers, one to tell it the content type is JSON, and another one that actually contains my access token. And then when I hit that, and it's received and it's successful, I get back this little title that says, hey, your definition was created. In this case, I'm doing PyCharm, because I use PyCharm for all my projects, so I wanted to make a patch definition for it. Come back to the web UI now, and if I scroll way down the list, because I now only have one definition, we can find that I'm right there. PyCharm is listed. Its version is at 2018.3.6. And you also see that the publisher, because I didn't pass the publisher in with the, there's a discrepancy in my help text. The publisher was not left blank. The publisher was actually just the name of the application at that point. So it would have been better if I had passed the publisher as JetBrains, but aesthetics matter. Demo fail. But now, right after I did that, I then updated PyCharm, and I had a new version. So now I want to go and update my patch definition to also include the newest version that I just got. So I'm going to hit beta2.communitypatch.com/API/v1/titles, but now I'm actually going to put the ID of my definition /version. So I'm actually going to be posting, it accepts this /version after my title ID so that I can just add versions onto it. So that patch only argument that you see for, this one actually uses the patch CLI in there. Another demo fail. That's supposed to be the patch starter script example. But the syntax is identical for patch start at this point. The patch only thing will only generate version JSON. So that those options where create the whole definition or just create the version, just creating the version facilitates these workflows because I'm only setting the version, I'm posting it onto my title that already exists on the service. Community Patch takes care of ingesting it, validating it, adding it into the correct place inside the definition, and then updating the current version and last modified tags on the definition itself. So there's also some advanced options that you can go read about in the docs for this endpoint where you actually can pick insert before or insert after and what version string it should be looking for. So that way you have some extra tools that are a little more advanced which allow you to insert versions at particular place inside the version history for that definition, which allows you to go back, clean up mistakes, or just add in other versions that were missed over the course of updating your definition. But, like I said before, Community Patch is really a service where the API takes care of a lot of the work for you. So from this point forward, every time I have a new version of PyCharm, I just need to do this in order to update that definition. And then within 5 minutes of that, Jamf Pro will ingest that new version of the definition, and then I will have it on display inside my patch report. And there we go, 2019.1.3. PyCharm I can see on the web UI that after I ran that command, it updated. So now, quick, because I'm eating up Dan's time here, I'm going to go through what it actually looks like to add these external sources into Jamf Pro itself. So in order to do that, you need the contributor ID, because that's how you actually get to the feed for that particular contributor. It's right here, right next to the display name. It's that hexadecimal string that you see. Go into in the settings for Jamf Pro, computer management, patch management. This is where you can see the Jamf source. and you can also see the URL for it. If you ever want to go poking around just the raw definitions and the summaries and everything, you can actually just grab that URL and go play around because it has those same exact 3 endpoints we already discussed. I'm going to hit new for external patch sources. And in here, I'm going to enter in a display name and the URL to where this feed is. In this case, and this is documented, it's going to be beta2.community-patch.com/jamf/v1/ the contributor ID that I want to read from. In this case, that's mine. After I save it, there's a test button, so I can validate that Jamf Pro is actually able to pull from this source I just added. So it's actually getting my definition list, and it sees that there's a title available, and it says, "Yep, everything's good. This is now usable." And now I can go back into the normal computer management side of things, go into patch management, and I can. Oh, sorry. So here it is listed under the internal source, and then we go into the normal admin side of things, and we can see that my source is now available alongside the Jamf one. I can click it, it'll go out, do that get software on it. It'll show me all the ones I have available, and now I can add them, and I can start using them just like the normal Jamf provided definitions. And like I said before, every contributor on Community Patch is their own patch source. So you can go through and you can add as many of those particular contributors in here as you want, and then pick and choose from them which definitions you want, and then have your whole solution going like that. You don't have to recreate all this stuff. You don't have to pull down their definitions and then repost them under yourself. Just subscribe to them. They're doing the work to update their definitions that they need. You can just come along for the ride and get the benefits of it. That's the whole point of this. A community managed patch source that's in the cloud, publicly available, where everyone's able to share what they're doing so we don't have to duplicate work all the time. Not duplicating work is kind of nice. So, enough of me. Let's go to Dan, and Dan can talk about what they've been doing at the University of Minnesota.
How are you doing? So, all of our automation starts with AutoPkg or AutoPkg. How many of you in here use AutoPkg right now? So maybe half. Okay. So we use AutoPkg to do both the updates and the install. Excuse me. But as Bryson was pointing out, we didn't have any dashboards. We had no way to report to the management. So we decided to move to use patch management as soon as it came out. But again, we only had those 60, and a lot of them are duplicate titles from Jamf to choose from. So we needed a way to move off from that. I apologize, this is super small, but that basically shows one of our recipes where it's only an install policy for the initial install for end users to see. And then our repo of AutoPkg recipes, we probably have 70 recipes, I think, all internally hosted. Which is fun and not really how it's designed to work, so take note. So when we get a software request, we generally try to throw everything into AutoPkg because it's automated. That's the plan. When we do that, we also look to see if we can create a definition that we can put out on our patch server. So as soon as Patchserver was adopted, it was great. We added 8, 9 titles, something like that. Then Jamf mentioned, or I should say Jamf mentioned that they would accept external sources. And then Bryson created the external source. So we jumped on and we built that pretty quickly. And so here's a list of, or a shortened list of some of the patch definitions that we have on our external server. We have 47 of our own hosted definitions. Some of them are duplicates of Jamf just because we do it differently. We like Java or JDK, we do that a little bit differently, so we host our own. When it first started, patchstarter.py didn't exist. Patch CLI didn't exist. So I had to go through his schema, that he posted, build them manually, which was painful. So use Patchstarter or the Patch CLI if you do this. But that doesn't get you all the way there. It only works on the applications. There are other things like the OpenJDK or key server. Many people probably use key server in here. That exists. You can get the definition, but I don't know that the Patch CLI will pull it correctly. The other thing that we do a lot of is instead of using the extension attributes as part of the script, we just create extension attributes. And so those are available just in Jamf as normal inventory search items. You can do them advanced searches or smart groups. So when we build the new patch definition, instead of using the app version or bundle ID, we'll switch it and we'll use whatever we call that EA as equal to or is like, whatever the case may be, so that we can pull in our own searches, our own EAs, and use those as our criteria. So another thing that we use for our automation is GitHub. GitHub's talked about a lot here. It's been, I think, mentioned in just about every session I've been at so far. Are all of you familiar with it and use it? If not, also another great tool. It provides a lot of portability, which is useful for us. One, if we need to spin up a new patch server, if something goes down because servers die. So that allows us to move those definitions around between patch servers. It also allows us from our workstation to create new definitions and get them out to the patch server. We can do that using Patch CLI. We can use that just manually creating them using the template, whatever it happens to be. Version control is another great thing. One, because you can see all the versions of that you've put out to your patch server in case the server dies and you don't have a backup of the database, which I haven't yet created one, but it's a good idea. So if need be, you can go back through all of those versions and find them all and then put them back into your patch server. It also gives you the ability to see if you've changed your criteria. If you switch from the bundle ID to the application name, that's tracked there plus why you did that. And then it also allows you to build templates. So we have 47 software titles, which means we have 94 different JSON files that go along with them. One for the full patch version, or full patch definition, and then one for the version, just the patch only. Let's see. So this is a script that I created because as we started doing this, it was all manual, very time consuming, and there's only 3 of us on the team. So one person doing this for 4 hours a day is not a great use of time. So I started writing a script that will go through on our AutoPkg machine using a launch daemon that after AutoPkg is done running for the daily run, it'll go through and see what's new and update the patch server. And again, this is kind of small and a little unclear, but the slides will be out there. Plus, I do have a link to the template that this is on. So what it does is it goes out to the GitHub repo, pulls in any new JSON files that we would have created, so new definitions or ones that would have been updated by our test server. So it sees those and doesn't have to actually update them. And then uses a tool created by Shay Craig called JSS Helper. And what that does is we feed in to the JSS Helper the JSS URL and the fact that we want packages. So it goes out to the JSS, grabs all the packages that we have in our Jamf server, dumps them in a text file. Well, it's been doing this for days and days and days. So what it does then is it looks at the text file from yesterday, looks at the one from today, and just does a diff. What's different? What's new? Takes those and throws them in a new text file. We got lots of text files. And then, once it does that, it takes that new text file, it parses through the names on there, grabs the application title, grabs the version, separates them, throws them into two different arrays so that we can associate the two of them together without making it too complicated. Here, then, now what it does is it goes and looks for, in the location of the JSON files, it's looking for the name and a very specific file name string. So it would be like Microsoft Office update or something like that. And if it finds it, then it goes through that JSON file, and it updates the date, and it updates the version. Once it's done doing that, it sends a note to HipChat, which we use and are currently switching to Slack. But it'll send a note to whatever your preferred messaging or notification center thing is, and we'll tell you that it's now updated this package, or this title's been updated to this version. It will spit out two results. One, if the JSON file is there, and if so, it's been updated to this version and updated on the patch server. If not, if there's no JSON file for it, it says this thing has shown up, it's new, it has not been updated on the patch server, so you're going to have to do something with it. So that could be anything from something we're not tracking definitions for, or Jamf curated definition like Google Chrome. The final thing it does is it commits all of those new updates on those JSON files back out to GitHub so that we can see them. We know that they've changed. Any other patch servers or any other AutoPkg servers we have running will also pick up those new JSON files for the next day. So that leads into the patch management. Our organization, like many other education organizations, is a weird hybrid managed thing. We are kind of centrally managed, but there's also all those departments that don't want to do it. So we do global management for some things, like Google Chrome, Firefox, Microsoft Office, Java, things that update a lot and are also giant security holes. Other things that update less often or are very specific to just things that we're deploying, such like Tableau Reader, Tableau Public, our key server clients, those are all just internal to us. We're the only ones that use them. So then now we have to patch those just within our sites. I don't know how many of you use sites within your Jamf Pro instances, but that is, if you don't patch it globally, you have to patch it per site. So if one site doesn't want it, well, then you have to do it manually for each other one. So global is the way to go. And with heightened security, it's moving more in that direction, and it's a good point to use to try to patch things at a global level. So for our patching, what we do is we create 3 different policies. We create our test one, which automatically installs on a test fleet of machines. It notifies whoever's in the test machine that this app is going to close. You got 15 minutes, make it count. Then we have just the regular update, which is scoped to all computers, except for those in the test and those in the exception group, because there's always an exception. Those are self-service for 7 days. Once that 7 days hits, it's automatically installed, kills the app. They have 30 minutes to shut down and finish what they're doing. Then there's the exception group, which it sits out in self-service until they never patch it. Office, so one other thing that we try to do is we try to have one patch software title per thing if we can. So like Office or PowerPoint, we'll say. PowerPoint has one title. But within there, we have 6 or 7 different patch policies because we're still out there with 2016 and there's 2019 or O365. So we have to have policies that cover all those things. Unfortunately, this is still a manual process. The plan is, in the future, is to try to use the API in Jamf to update the package on the definition, so there's a package associated with the version, and then update the patch policies to automatically update the target version of that policy. Played around with it last week. I can interact with the API, I just can't actually make any changes to the API. It's very, very strange. Another future thing that I'm working on, which is probably going to be quite a while, because my Python is not great, is an AutoPkg processor, which will use the patch CLI within an AutoPkg recipe to generate that patch definition, push it out through the API using the profile with all the appropriate options, the P for the publisher, the V for the version if you want to change it, things like that. That's still in development, and I welcome anyone who wants to help with that to feel free. Again, I have the URLs for the patch processor I'm working on, the template for the script, the automated script, JSS helper, which is a necessary tool and built into that script. If you have other things that you want to use, you certainly can. And then just GitHub and AutoPkg. One thing I want to mention about the automated script is that it is resilient to your own EA criteria within your definition. So when you build that definition, if you're using a custom EA like we do for OpenJDK, it won't change that. It will still work. It doesn't try to go back to the application title or the bundle ID. It only touches the date and the version, and then uploads it into the patch server. So it's resilient to any customizations that you would have made. The only thing it touches again is the version and the date. And I think that covers it.
There we go. Q&A time. And just one thing to note about what Dan was going over, he's not using community patch. He's using an on-premise version of it, essentially.
Yep.
But before there was the cloud, there was a server. And he's using the server version, which was the basis for what became community patch.
And we are looking at moving to the community patch, but UIS may say no, unless it's the UIS is University Information Security. They may say no to any internal tools, but like external software like APE or GIMP we might be able to put out on community patch. So hopefully we'll be able to get 2/3 of our current patches out there. So
if everybody wants to hold on to their drinks, catchbox time. Questions? Way in the back.
So a feature request I put through that I hope at some point could possibly be done for your side is that in your definitions, the apps that need to close, the main problem with the way the patch management system is designed is that it uses a management action to tell how long it's going to take. And the problem is management actions in Jamf are notifications and not alerts. So they pop up real quick and then they go away real quick. So people can miss this.
Yeah.
And some people get upset if Google Chrome all of a sudden just shuts down. I've been asking for the ability for the patch, for the definition to basically say, well, let me check to see if they're open and then I won't execute. But if they're not open, I'll do the update.
I've heard that one a lot. Is that that's out on Jamf Nation right now.
Yeah.
If you
yeah.
can get everybody in this room to go pile onto that, that raises its visibility.
Yeah, I don't know if other people have made one, but I know I did make one. Just basically background attempts.
So for the PSU Mac 205 room, if you want to post the link to that feature request in there, if everybody could go click that link and then demand that feature get implemented, you know, the more noise a feature request generates in Jamf Nation, the more visible it actually becomes to product management. They are the gatekeepers.
Yeah, because in your definitions, some of the things are true and not true. Google Chrome, Firefox, Java, Flash, they can all be updated while open. They just don't apply until closed.
Yeah.
So that would be a good case for you to use the external, use your own definition, because then you could take out the must-kill apps, and then if it's in a blank array, it just installs and doesn't try to kill anything.
Yeah.
I don't want this to sound really negative, but it's like the official Jamf definitions do go to the lowest common denominator.
Sure.
So that's where you get into, well, those definitions are no longer adequate for me, so I'm going to actually run my own fork of them that has modifications to allow for my workflows.
Sure. Yeah.
Yep.
It'd just be nice if they could just be like, well, let's just
But
try.
that's a feature that lots of people have asked for regardless of that anyway.
Yeah.
Because then it's much more App Store-like. There's actually a conversation I had with Aaron Miska back when they were building this. It should be like the App Store. If I'm using it, it won't do it to me. Oh, that's recorded. I'm going to get yelled at. All right. Other questions? Patch stuff. Community patch questions. Stuff.
Yeah, because I have to keep everything on-prem. JMU will not
Lots
allow
of people are like that, and I owe parties I can't name major updates to the on-prem version of Patchserver, which will include things like LDAP, possibly SAML authentication, crap like that. So you can expect that at some point.
Yeah, there's good documentation out on the patch server about running it in Linux, running it in Docker.
I'm not going to support running a web application on Mac anymore, by the way, because Apple's going out of their way to kill off making that an easy thing to do. So the recommended way will be to run it in a Docker container.
And does the documentation, because we're all Windows servers, where we are not any Linux, does documentation help with setting up?
I need someone actually to help me with what Windows instructions would look like.
Okay, because I have no idea.
Okay. But if you're running Windows Server 2016,
Yeah.
you can run containers.
True.
Because Microsoft's cool now. I don't know if all of you missed that, but they're kind of cool now.
Yep.
All right. Thanks for coming.
Thanks.
Thank you.